In a small town far from the noise of the cities lived Mrs. Eleanor, a widow who rarely smiled. Her house stood at the end of an old dirt road, surrounded by tall grass and broken fences. Once it had been a happy home filled with laughter and music. But since her husband's death 5 years ago, everything had changed. She stopped visiting the market, stopped meeting people, and only spoke when needed. The townsfolk began to whisper that she had lost her mind. Children called her the Mad Widow, and even grown men warned strangers to stay away from her house. Daniel, a young worker from another town, arrived that summer to help with road repairs. He was polite, quiet, and hardworking, and people liked him instantly. During his lunch breaks, he would sit near the hill that overlooked the widow's house. He had heard the same stories everyone told, how she spoke to ghosts and claimed people came to her barn at night. The older men laughed about it, saying, "Don't listen to her, boy. She's lost her senses." Daniel usually smiled and stayed quiet. He didn't believe in judging others without reason. One hot afternoon, while walking back from work, Daniel saw Mrs. Eleanor outside her home. She was trying to carry a heavy bucket of water, but her arms trembled under the weight. Without thinking, he hurried over and offered help. At first she looked frightened to see someone so close, but then she nodded. Her voice was weak when she said, "They come here at night. They think I can't see them." Daniel thought she meant wild animals, maybe thieves, but her serious eyes made him pause. He didn't reply, only smiled kindly and left. That night her words echoed in his mind. He looked out of his window and saw the outline of her barn standing dark and lonely against the moonlight. He told himself not to think about it. People had warned him she wasn't well, yet something about her calm but fearful expression wouldn't let him rest. The next day, Daniel found footprints in the mud near the widow's fence, fresh ones, larger than hers. He also noticed broken boards near her barn. When he asked a few men at the cafe about it, they only laughed. "She probably walks in circles and forgets her own steps," one said. But Daniel wasn't sure. He had seen too many things in life to ignore what didn't feel right. One evening, rain started to fall. The wind grew strong and lightning flashed across the sky. Daniel couldn't sleep. He got up and stood by the window. That was when he saw it, faint lights moving near the widow's barn. 2 figures, dark against the storm, were carrying something heavy. His heart began to race. He realized she had been telling the truth. Without waiting, he grabbed his flashlight and ran through the rain. The mud splashed against his boots as thunder cracked overhead. When he reached the barn, he heard real voices, 2 men talking in low tones. He peeked through a broken gap in the wood. They were loading boxes into a truck. Strange symbols were painted on the boxes. Daniel crouched lower, trying to hear them. One man said, "We need to move fast before she starts screaming again." The other replied, "Who's going to believe her? Everyone thinks she's crazy." Daniel's breath caught. The truth hit him like cold wind. They were using her property for something illegal. He took a step back, but the floor creaked under his weight. One man turned suddenly, shouting, "Who's there?" Daniel ran. He slipped on the wet ground, but kept going until he reached the widow's porch. He banged on her door, calling her name. The door opened slowly, and Mrs. Eleanor stood there holding a candle. Her eyes met his, calm and knowing. "You saw them, didn't you?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, still catching his breath. Rainwater dripped from his clothes. "Yes," he said softly. "You were right. There are men in your barn." She didn't look surprised, only sad. "They've been coming for months," she said quietly. "They think I'm too broken to notice." Daniel wanted to call the sheriff right away, but something in her tone made him wait. She looked fragile, but there was a strength in her voice, a mix of pain and courage. She told him how, before her husband died, he had discovered strange men using the old mine tunnel behind their barn. One night he went down there to confront them and never came back. People said it was an accident, but she had always known better. Lightning flashed again, lighting her face in the dark. For a moment, Daniel saw not a mad widow, but a woman who had carried a secret truth no one would hear. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll go to the sheriff. I'll tell him everything," but she shook her head. "The sheriff won't listen. He never did. They all laugh at me. They always have." Daniel could see she was right. The next morning, no one would believe her. They would think he had gone mad, too. Yet he couldn't turn away. He promised her he would find proof no matter what. The storm raged through the night. Daniel sat awake near the window watching the widow's barn. The lights didn't appear again, but he could feel something shifting in the air. The small town had always been quiet, but now it held secrets no one wanted to face. As dawn came, Daniel saw the widow outside, standing by her porch with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at him and gave a faint nod, as if thanking him for believing when others wouldn't. For Daniel, that small gesture meant more than words. He didn't know what he was stepping into, but he knew one thing for sure. The woman everyone called mad wasn't crazy at all. She had seen something real, and he was now the only one willing to listen. That morning, as the sun rose behind the clouds, Daniel decided that the truth hidden in that barn wouldn't stay buried much longer. He would uncover it, even if the whole town turned against him, because sometimes the truth only finds light when someone dares to believe the one everyone else has silenced. The morning after the storm, Daniel walked through the wet streets toward the sheriff's office. His clothes were still damp and his mind was full of questions. The memory of the men at the barn, their voices, and the boxes haunted him. He had to do something. When he entered the small office, the sheriff looked up from his coffee and said, "You must be the new road worker. What brings you here so early?" Daniel told him everything, about the men, the lights, and the boxes with strange marks. The sheriff listened for a while, then leaned back in his chair. "Son," he said slowly, "you've been talking to that widow, haven't you? She's not right in the head. Probably just some kids playing around. Don't go sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Daniel tried to insist. "Sir, I saw them myself. There were 2 men and they were carrying heavy crates. You have to check it out." But the sheriff only shook his head. "We've been through this before. She's called us a dozen times over the years. Always some story about thieves or ghosts. You seem like a good boy and don't waste your time." Daniel walked out frustrated. The people in this town were blind to what was right in front of them. He returned to the widow's house where she was already waiting on the porch with a cup of tea. She didn't look surprised when he told her that the sheriff refused to help. She simply said, "I told you they wouldn't listen. But we can't stop now. There's something you need to see." She led him behind the barn, to a wooden hatch half covered with mud and straw. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. She pulled away the debris, revealing a rusty metal handle. "My husband found this tunnel long ago," she explained. "He said it was built during the war, but later men started using it for things they shouldn't. The night before he died, he told me he was going to expose them. Then he never came back." Daniel felt a chill. He helped her lift the hatch. The hinges creaked loudly as it opened, releasing a cold draft from below. A ladder descended into darkness. The widow handed him a small lantern, and together they went down. The air smelled of dust and damp earth. The tunnel was narrow, with stone walls and wooden supports. They walked slowly, their footsteps echoing softly. After a few minutes, Daniel saw what looked like boxes stacked against the wall. He brushed away the dirt and realized they were the same kind of crates he'd seen the men moving the night before. They were filled with stolen goods, antiques, jewelry, old paintings, and even weapons wrapped in cloth. The widow's eyes filled with tears. "He was right," she whispered. "They killed him because he knew." Daniel felt anger rising inside him. Whoever these men were, they had used her home as their hiding place and made her look like a fool to the whole town. He turned to her and said, "We'll make them pay for this, but we need proof strong enough that no one can deny it." Suddenly they heard voices from the tunnel entrance. 2 men were coming down laughing. Daniel quickly put out the lantern and pulled the widow behind a stack of boxes. The footsteps came closer. One man said, "We'll take the last batch tonight. After that, we're done." The other chuckled. "Good riddance. That old woman's probably still up there talking to her cats. She doesn't even know what's under her house." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. The widow held his arm tightly, shaking her head, silently telling him not to move. The men walked past them, their flashlights swinging across the walls. When their light disappeared deeper into the tunnel, Daniel whispered, "Now." They crept back the way they came, careful not to make a sound. Once outside, they ran toward town. Daniel found the old telephone booth near the gas station. He called the state police, his voice steady but urgent. "There are criminals hiding stolen goods under a property near Oak Ridge Road," he said. "You need to send officers fast." The officer on the other end took the message seriously. "Stay where you are," he said. "We're sending units immediately." Daniel hung up, his heart pounding. The widow leaned against the wall, breathing hard but calm. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "They'll finally see." Within an hour, police cars and trucks rolled into the quiet town. Their flashing lights reflected off the puddles from last night's rain. The townspeople came out of their houses confused and curious. They followed the officers toward the widow's property, whispering among themselves. The sheriff looked uneasy when he saw the state police. He tried to ask what was going on, but Daniel spoke up. "Those men you didn't believe me about, they're here. And they're using the widow's barn to hide stolen goods." The sheriff's face turned red. He followed the officers down the tunnel. Minutes later, they came back up carrying the crates. Everyone stood in shock. The truth was right there, shining under the morning light. The men were caught trying to escape through the woods. The widow stood quietly, her hands folded together. For years, people had called her mad. Now they couldn't even look her in the eye. The sheriff walked over, removing his hat. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, "I'm sorry. We should have listened." She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "It's easy to laugh at someone when you don't carry their pain." Then she turned and walked toward her porch. Daniel followed, standing beside her as reporters and townspeople watched from a distance. In the days that followed, everything changed. The widow's name was cleared. The newspapers wrote about the stolen goods, the secret tunnel, and the brave young man who had believed when no one else did. The sheriff tried to make up for his mistake, but some things can't be undone. Daniel helped her fix the barn and mend the fences. She seemed lighter, her eyes softer than before. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "You know, my husband used to say the truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits for someone brave enough to listen." Daniel smiled. "You were brave, too. You kept speaking even when no one believed you." She chuckled quietly. "Maybe I was just stubborn. But I'm glad you listened. If you hadn't, they would have gotten away again." He stayed in town a few more months, finishing his work and helping her rebuild the parts of her home that time had damaged. The townsfolk began to greet her again, this time with respect. Children who once ran past her house now waved as they went by. She even returned to church wearing her old hat and walking tall. When it was finally time for Daniel to leave, the widow stood on the porch holding a small wrapped package. "Take this," she said. Inside was a pocket watch with her husband's initials engraved on it. "He would have liked you," she added softly. Daniel didn't know what to say. He just nodded and said, "I'll never forget you, ma'am." As he walked away down the dusty road, the sun glowed warm over the fields. He looked back once more and saw her standing there, a calm smile on her face. The woman everyone once called mad now stood as a symbol of truth and courage. That night, as he boarded the bus out of town, Daniel thought about everything that had happened. Sometimes the world silences people who speak the truth. Sometimes pain makes others turn blind. But one person listening, one act of belief can change everything. The town of Oak Ridge would never forget the story of the widow who was right all along and the young man who dared to believe her. Years later, when people told the story to their children, they didn't say the mad widow anymore. They said Mrs. Eleanor, the woman who saw the truth when no one else would. And somewhere deep in Daniel's pocket, the old watch still ticked, reminding him that the truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always wakes when someone chooses to listen.